Step into any film class and you'll find some kids making an assignment in the style of Wes Anderson. If autism was a guy, it would be this man. All of TikTok is doing his style and Wes hates it. Anyway, yesterday I watched Bottle Rocket and I realized that means I've watched every Wes Anderson movie, so as every film adjacent YouTuber does, I want to rank them all, starting with... Now before I get started, I really just want to say all of Wes Anderson's movies are good. Like, none of them are truly terrible, and this one I just couldn't really engage with, and that's Rushmore. It's Anderson's second movie, so he's definitely still trying to find his feet as a director, and you can kind of feel that, but that being said, some Andersonianisms are found in the movie. Particularly the dialogue and the way it's rhythmically used, shallow and symmetrical space, and some wacky costumes, but for the most part it seems very average and scrappy. Some shots are handheld, shots aren't composed to an insane degree like his later works, and the edit just feels a lot more slower paced. Now, I'm not saying every movie should be edited like an action film with cuts every 2 seconds, but I think this movie needs to take a hint from its title and Rushmore. But that being said, it has a wonderful heart to it. The acting is very solid. Jason Schwartzman in his first feature film role is a highlight here, with Anderson's regulars filling out the rest of the cast expertly. I think this heart also comes from Anderson himself. He said that the main character of Max is very much based after himself and his experience in school, and you can feel that genuine emotion oozing through the screen, which in his later work seems to be missing. Anyway, for whatever reason, Rushmore's strength is in its emotional core, Max's unrequited love for his teacher, and the awkwardness of growing up. And in that aspect, it's a wonderful film. Bottle Rocket is the most recent Wes Anderson movie I've watched, and it just so happens to be his first. The story goes Anderson, Luke and Owen Wilson made a short film titled Bottle Rocket, which is basically just the first 13 minutes of this movie, and it was shown in Sundance in 1994. The short then got the attention of filmmaker James L. Brooks, who agreed to finance the feature film version, and the rest is history. And you know what isn't history? You subscribing to my channel, because you should do that right now. Nailed it! As for the film itself, it's quite solid for Anderson's first foray into features. An entertaining plot, great performances, and dynamic camera work, and it's interesting to see what parts of the well-known Andersonian style are starting to form. For example, the sort of dry humor and monotone rhythm of speech that is quintessential Wes Anderson only pops up here and there. Some symmetrical shots are here and wacky costume choices. It really feels like the production team is just getting the hang of filmmaking, and honestly, it's exciting. You can almost see Owen Wilson break character in a shot, Luke Wilson accidentally gets in the way of an over-the-shoulder shot. You can see the seams of the work, and it's quite charming in that regard. But where it falls down for me is once again the pacing. It actually got so slow in the middle that I turned off the film and picked it up the next day. And for a 90-minute movie, that's quite the achievement. But even with my complaints, it's still a great film. A bit rough around the edges, but charming enough for a first try at a feature. Also, Anderson's music choices are a standout in his filmography, and it starts from his first. The man does a good needle drop. Isle of Dogs is absolutely horrible, like it's genuinely just so boring. Thinking about it, this might actually be the worst film in Anderson's filmography, but I think I put it above these other two just for its technical ability. And I'm not saying Bottle Rocket and Rushmore are horrible technically, like there are some beautiful shots and sequences that are edited perfectly, but the amount of precision put into Isle of Dogs, in my opinion, outweighs the two previous films. But every other aspect is so much worse. The story really wasn't gripping for me. I don't know if it was because the characters were kind of just lifeless or the acting didn't come across well or something. The voice acting is fine. Wes Anderson's signature monotone way of delivery paired with not too engaging models just really lost my interest in the story. The movie also landed itself in hot water after claims of cultural appropriation were leveraged at it. Critics accused Anderson of using Japanese imagery in a stereotypical way only for aesthetics. Other critics also assert that the Tracy character in the film is the textbook definition of the white savior trope, where a white person is the person to come in and save the minority characters. There are conflicting views on this and both sides can be debated, but I certainly don't have enough time or expertise to talk through these issues in a proper, thoughtful manner. All I know is that the vibe was off with this one, and I really don't feel like returning to it. Plus, Wes Anderson has made another stop-motion film with animals that is a lot less problematic, and it just so happens to be a better film too. The Royal Tenenbaums is probably the movie that solidified Wes Anderson's reputation as a great director. It's his third feature, and it really hones in on his style and unique visuals that he's so well known for. It's also his first movie where he had enough clout to get the actors he wanted and wrote for. Etheline was written for Angelica Houston in mind, and the Tenenbaum patriarch Royal was written for Gene Hackman, and he played the role. But it took Hackman some convincing for the role, so Gene Wilder was also considered, which I think would have made the movie like 10 times better, but I just love Gene Wilder. I think thematically this movie has a lot to chew on, like depression, dysfunctional families, nostalgia for the past, and probably 1,000 more things you can unpack. Now this movie is so far down the list because honestly it gets hard with Anderson's films. I think from here on out I would watch any of these movies again. I think the Royal Tenenbaums can just be a bit boring. I get that Wes's style can be slow and the way of speaking can be eccentric, but in this movie I just couldn't handle it. It feels like Anderson is towing the line between this absurdist and comedic style that we actually see in full force later in his filmography and just realism. All through the movie I'm just begging for him to pick a side. I don't know, I really feel like I'm reaching for criticisms here. I think the material just didn't gel with me, and that's okay. Like I said, after a second watch it might go a bit higher on my list, but right now it sits at 8. Also, this take is probably the wildest one I'll have today, because just by quickly looking up other people's rankings on Letterboxd and YouTube, the Royal Tenenbaums is like the front runner. So don't kill me. People bash on this movie all the time, and I don't really think it's that bad. It's a pretty solid story following 3 brothers played by Anderson's typical band of actors, Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody, and Jason Schwartzman, as they navigate their grief surrounding their father's death as they search for their mother in India. The film ends on a pretty on-the-nose metaphor about letting go of your baggage, but it still gets me every time. I am a sucker for found family type stories, which although this movie they're already a family, they do find love and appreciation in each other that they didn't have at the beginning, so I think that counts. The most emotional part of the movie by far is around the halfway point. The brothers are hiking through India and they see a couple boys floating on a raft in a river. Then it suddenly capsizes. Our main characters go to help and save the 2 boys, but one of them dies. They promptly head to their village and they stay and have a funeral for him. This tragic moment comes after a first half which is pretty lighthearted, so this moment hits like a ton of bricks. The whole narrative comes to a standstill to process this trauma of a young child dying. This point in the film lets our characters slow down and reflect on their own actions, and it's part of their healing process, which is really emotional to watch. This moment solidifies for me how good this film is and deserves to be a lot higher in other people's rankings. I think people hate it because it came out at a time where it felt like Anderson was making movies that were like very samey. Every 3 years in the early 2000s you could bet Anderson was going to make a melancholic, absurdist drama about a dysfunctional family, and by the time the Darjeeling Limited rolled around, people were kind of just bored of the shtick. But I personally think it deserves a re-evaluation, and this is number 7 on the list. The man just makes good films. Moonrise Kingdom is a little coming-of-age film, which is a topic that Anderson loves to cover in his films. It follows a 12-year-old Boy Scout, Sham Sikorsky, as he falls in love with another child, Susie Bishop. They run away together, learn the meaning of love and growing up, you know, the typical coming-of-age stuff. And it's cute, it's twee, it's very Wes Anderson. His style is just perfect for this type of film. The use of pastel colours and the colour grading reflects how children look at the world, with naivete and optimism. Anderson's dialogue is also very simple, straightforward and dry, which can come across as childish. Even the set design, particularly at the moment of the movie when the kids run away and set up camp, is just so whimsical. A pastel coloured record player, yellow tents, and a stack of science fiction books, it reflects the child's state of mind and what they prioritise. It's actually insane that Wes Anderson didn't write a story about children any sooner, because his style just fits so perfectly. Now, why is this movie in 6th place if I'm saying how cool it is? Well, it's just kind of forgettable. I only watched this like a couple months ago and I had to check IMDb twice just to get the names of our 2 main characters. This is my same criticism of the movies before this one and movies in general, really. I can identify that a movie can be great technically and I can tell when performances are great, but for me to really fall in love with a movie, it has to resonate or hit me at the right time. Moonrise Kingdom just didn't do that for me. I'm sure it's fun and whimsical, Edward Norton and Bruce Willis are wonderful, and the love story is cute, but it just hasn't stayed with me like Inside Llewyn Davis or 12 Angry Men did. Maybe that means Moonrise Kingdom needs another watch from me, but right now it's going to be sitting at number 6. Asteroid City is that new one that just came out and it isn't that bad. I watched it in cinemas and I don't think it's on streaming yet, at least in Australia, so my judgment might be coloured a bit by just recency bias. It's a little rumination on grief, nihilism and hope wrapped up in a cute, quaint Wes Anderson package, and I really think it was quite effective. Similar to the Darjeeling Limited, it had a very on-the-nose metaphor, equating a funeral plot to a movie plot. Early in the movie, some of the kids of our main character bury their mother's ashes in a shallow grave, and at the end of the film, Tom Hanks' character remarks that it wasn't much of a plot, but I guess that's the point. And he's right, the plot of the film is quite meandering. There isn't a big antagonist that our heroes must defeat. Things kind of just happen, and we see the characters' responses to it. It was actually quite refreshing to watch. The one thing that confused me a little was the framing devices, as Anderson does a lot in his movies. They're often stories about stories. I think this movie is an adaptation of a play about the making of the Asteroid City movie, told by a Twilight Zone type anthology TV series. I could have got that completely wrong, but that's what I took away from it. Either way, it's confusing, so I think watching it a second time will clear this up for me. I've seen reviews about the film and they say it's emotionally hollow, and I think you can probably make that argument. Like, at face value, the acting is quite hollow like any standard Wes Anderson film, but I'd argue that the movie as a whole is quite emotional. The individual parts are quite artificial, but looking at the film as a complete piece, it almost brought me to tears. It's very lovely and beautiful. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's what I felt in the cinema. Definitely worth a second watch though. If you have no clue who Wes Anderson is, this is the movie that you would know. Fantastic Mr. Fox is a stop-motion animation movie based on the Roald Dahl book of the same name, although it does deviate from the book quite substantially. Henry Selick was originally attached to be animation director on it, but he had to move on to work on Coraline, so Mark Gustafson was named as his replacement, even though Selick helped out remotely during production. Although this kerfuffle happened, the animation is quite spectacular and has such a unique style. Wes Anderson somehow was able to transfer his iconic style to stop motion, and it's wonderful. And for an animated movie, the performances are very realistic and believable, and I think this is because all of the vocals were recorded beforehand and shot on location. Yes, on location. On the special features of the film, they show the process, and Anderson describes it as, we went out to the forest, we went to an attic, we went in a stable, we went underground for some things. There was a great spontaneity in the recordings because of that. And I just think that's so cool. It's such a fun way to record, and you can tell the actors are having a blast. And that energy comes across in the film itself and just elevates it. As the list goes on, it'll make sense that I find it harder and harder to talk about something that I dislike, but I honestly can't think of anything negative here. The Letterboxd Top 250 Narrative Films list agrees with me. Fantastic Mr. Fox currently sits at 170 on that list, and is the highest Wes Anderson movie on that list, so most people love this one. The movie itself was also nominated for Best Animated Feature, losing to Up, which, you know, makes sense. I gotta level with you. From like the Grand Budapest Hotel, I was on a Wes Anderson hate train. Like, I was fully one of those people that was saying like all of his movies are style over substance, and I kind of just hate the vibe, and Isle of Dogs then just made me really sour on him even more. But then I watched The French Dispatch on streaming, and I think he won me back. I fully realized The French Dispatch isn't everyone's favorite, but I really enjoyed it. For some reason, I feel Wes Anderson works better with short narratives than a full movie. I really enjoy these little vignettes that tell separate stories, with the loose connection of the newspaper, the titular French Dispatch being in the background of all of them. The first piece is titled The Concrete Masterpiece, which is in black and white, so you know it's fancy. And honestly, I think it's just the most forgettable one. Benicio del Toro is an artist and also a murderer. These murderous paintings catch the eye of Adrian Brody, who is an art dealer, and shenanigans ensue, blah blah blah, capitalism, blah blah blah, I forget most of this one. The next short is titled Revisions to the Manifesto, and shows a revolutionary played by Willy Wonka fall into a relationship with an older reporter, Frances McDormand, and they learn that they aren't the best for each other. Very much a coming of age story. Moving on. The last one I think is the best one, The Private Dining Room of the Police Commissioner. It follows culinary reporter Jeffrey Wright as he recounts a meal prepared by the legendary police officer / chef Lieutenant Nescaffier. During a meal, a French gang try to break someone out of jail, and hilarity ensues. It has a fun little animated segment of a car chase too, which I just thought was creative. All up, it was fun and an interesting watch, and it won me back over to liking Wes Anderson again, which ultimately led me to try and watch all of his features, and in turn create this video, so be grateful. The Grand Budapest Hotel was the first movie I watched as part of my film degree, and I don't really have any point bringing that up, it's just a fact that I have about the movie. As I said before, this movie kind of turned me off from Wes Anderson, but in revisiting it, I think it's probably his masterpiece. From a visual standpoint, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it's pretty much perfect. Pause on any frame of the movie and I guarantee you that everything from the blocking to the use of color, lighting, set design is just perfect. Ralph Fiennes and Tony Revolori are just perfectly cast here, pulling off Anderson's signature dry wit with neither of them being in a Wes Anderson movie before. I think I'm repeating myself here, but I think this is Anderson's magnum opus. He started writing it in 2006, where it spiraled from an 18-page short film to a full feature film script by 2012. Anderson would often be working on this project during production of his other films, for example simultaneously location scouting the Grand Budapest Hotel while at Cannes for Moonrise Kingdom. It is clear that so many people put so much work into this film. Robert Yeoman, the cinematographer, put in a lot of work to solidify the stop motion and matte effects throughout the film, not even to mention the precise dolly shots, pans and tilts that are rife in the film. Adam Stockhausen was the head of production designer for this film and perfected the miniatures. And the veteran costume designer Melania Canonero, who has worked with Stanley Kubrick, Francis Ford Coppola and of course Wes Anderson, created the spectacular 1930s period costumes that were so good she won an Oscar for them. In fact, the Grand Budapest Hotel was nominated for 9 Oscars in 2015 and won 4. Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Original Score, and Best Production Design. This makes the Grand Budapest Hotel as Anderson's most nominated and awarded film in his filmography, with barely any of his other films getting nominated for any Oscars. When The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou was released, it was met to bad to mixed reviews, and honestly, I don't know why people seem to hate it. I think it's because it was just a Wes Anderson movie. I think people just didn't like the slapstick humor and whimsy, but modern audiences love it. Hell, Everything Everywhere All at Once just won Best Picture. Where The Grand Budapest Hotel is Wes Anderson's definitive step into a new and more polished style, The Life Aquatic is the halfway point between that and his early indie films. It has that interesting cinematography, dollies, pans, tilts, symmetrical framing, and miniature work, but he balances it out with funny yet tragic human stories that was the backbone of his early works. All the actors here are at the top of their game. Bill Murray was the biggest surprise to me. His biggest strength is to act above it all and cynical, but there reflects that in this performance here, but he plays Zissou with such empathy and true heartbreak, it's quite remarkable. If it's possible, almost every actor is a scene stealer here. Cate Blanchett's quiet yet strong performance, Willem Dafoe's wacky and confident first mate, and Owen Wilson's unsure but kind-hearted possible son of Zissou are all spectacular. The production design for the introduction scene is just wonderful. It's like a junkier version of the Grand Budapest, and it's just beautiful. Similarly beautiful is the score of the film, played diegetically by Sue George. He plays multiple David Bowie songs throughout the film, all with just his voice and a guitar. And if you couldn't get enough of the Wes Andersonisms in this film, there's even a little bit of stop motion animation thrown in there. All of the fish seen in the film were created by stop motion animation from The Nightmare Before Christmas's own Henry Selick. So all up, if I could only watch one Wes Anderson movie for the rest of my life, it would be The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. It has all the best elements of a Wes Anderson movie and just so happens to be a good film too. That's it. That's my ranking. I haven't watched all those new short films that went on Netflix because they were released today. And this is the last thing I'm recording.